All right, welcome everyone. Today we're taking a deep dive into something I think you'll find really, really useful. It's called the 80-20 principle.
Yeah, the 80-20 principle. Basically, the idea that a tiny amount of what you do actually leads to the vast majority of your result.
Exactly. And we've got a ton of material to work with here, all pointing to this idea of achieving more with less, cutting through the noise to focus on what really drives things.
Yeah, it kind of turns things on their head. You start to see that the universe, well, it's not exactly balanced. The source material even calls it wonky, which I kind of love.
Wonky is a good word for it, because we often think things should be split evenly, 50-50, right? But the 80-20 principle suggests that more often than not, about 80% of what we get actually comes from just 20% of our efforts.
Exactly. And as we'll dig into, understanding this kind of imbalance is actually really empowering. It can help you make massive gains in all sorts of areas.
For sure. And what's amazing is just how wide-ranging this principle seems to be. I mean, just glancing at the chapter titles here, we see it popping up in business, time management, relationships, even personal happiness. It's everywhere.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing. It really makes you question a lot of assumptions about how things work.
Absolutely.
Oh.
So for this deep dive, we're going to really unpack what this 80-20 principle is, how it shows up in all these different areas, and most importantly, how you can start thinking and acting with this principle in mind to see some real tangible benefits. Sound good?
Sounds great. Let's do it.
Okay. So first things first, what exactly is the 80-20 principle? Can we break it down in simple terms?
Sure. I think the easiest way to understand it is to think about the relationship between what you put in and what you get out, or, the causes and their effects. It's basically saying that this relationship is usually really uneven.
Uneven how?
Well, the source material has this great visual, like imagine a pie chart, right? And you see this tiny sliver representing, let's say, 20% of your effort. But that tiny sliver, it takes up this huge, like 80% chunk of the pie. That represents the results.
Oh, I see. So a tiny amount of effort leading to a huge outcome.
Exactly. Now, it's important to remember, and the source actually emphasizes this, that it's not always exactly 80-20. It's more of a general tendency. Sometimes it's closer to 70-30 or even 90-10. But the point is, there's usually a really significant imbalance, like way more than you'd expect.
Right. It's not about getting the numbers exactly right. It's about recognizing that things are usually way out of balance.
Exactly.
Okay. I'm starting to get it. So why is this, though? Why is the universe so, well, you said wonky,
Yeah,
rather.
wonky. Well, the source kind of touches on this idea of chaos theory.
Chaos theory. Sounds complicated.
It can be, but the basic idea is that in complex systems, and let's face it, most things are complex systems, you often see these unpredictable, disproportionate relationships.
Okay, so give me an example of that.
Sure. Think of a big network, like the internet, right? Some connections are way more crucial than others. You change one of those key connections, even a little bit, and it has this huge ripple effect throughout the whole thing. Change a less important one, not so much. It's like a recipe. A few key ingredients can completely change the flavor of a dish.
So it's like not all actions have equal consequences. Some are way more impactful than others.
Exactly. And that kind of explains why we see this 80-20 thing pop up so often, because the world is full of these complex, interconnected systems where small changes can have big, unpredictable effects.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the source talks about the evolution of the 80-20 principle, mentioning a couple of distinct waves. What were the big shifts it went through?
Right, so the first wave, they call it the quality revolution. This is all about businesses starting to realize that a small number of defects or problems were causing the vast majority of their headaches.
So like 20% of the defects leading to 80% of the quality issues?
Exactly, and they figured out that by focusing on fixing those key problems, they could dramatically improve their overall quality and efficiency.
Makes sense. Fix the big problems, the rest kind of takes care of itself.
Precisely. Then came the second wave, which they call the information revolution. This is where things get really interesting, especially for us today.
Okay, how so?
Well, with the explosion of data and information, the 80-20 principle became even more relevant. Because let's face it, we're bombarded with information all the time, but realistically, only a tiny fraction of it is actually valuable or useful.
True, it's like drinking from a fire hose.
Totally. So the ability to filter out the noise and zero in on that crucial 20% of information, the stuff that actually gives you insights and drives action, that became absolutely critical. And the source even argues that this information revolution still has a long way to run, meaning it's only going to become more important to master the skill.
Yeah, I mean, it already feels like we're drowning in information sometimes. So being able to cut through that and find the signal in the noise is only going to become more valuable. The source calls this a best-kept business secret. Why do you think that might be?
That's a good question. I think partly it's because it goes against our intuition. We tend to think that all effort should be equally rewarded or that all tasks deserve equal attention.
Right.
Yeah.
But the 80-20 principle is saying, nope, focus on the stuff that really matters.
Exactly. It's saying that you can achieve way more by being selective and strategic with your efforts. And that can be a tough pill to swallow. It also means being comfortable prioritizing, even neglecting certain things, which can feel wrong, even though it's often the smartest move.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, let's get into some specifics, particularly in the business world. The source material goes into a lot of detail about how the 80-20 principle applies to profit generation. Where do companies typically see this kind of imbalance in their earnings?
Well, they give this great example of a company called Electronic Instruments, Inc. They basically found that a small number of their product lines, maybe 20%, were generating the vast majority of their profits, like 80% or even more.
So they had all these products, but just a handful were the real money makers.
Right. And the source puts this into something they call an 80-20 table and an 80-20 chart. It really visually drives home how these few key products are carrying the whole company.
I'm starting to see how powerful this could be for businesses. If you can identify those key products, then you can really focus your resources on them, right?
Exactly. And it's not just about products, it applies to their customers too. They found that a small percentage of their customers, again, maybe 20%, were accounting for a huge chunk of their profits.
So you could have a ton of customers, but really it's just a small group that are actually making you the most money.
Yeah, and this could be for a lot of reasons. Maybe they buy more, or they come back more often, or it's just cheaper to do business with them.
Makes you wonder if businesses should be spending more time and effort on those key customers.
Right. And the source also breaks things down by customer type. Like maybe certain kinds of customers are just way more profitable than others.
That's interesting. It's all about finding those high-value segments, right?
Exactly. And it's not just limited to companies that sell products. The source also has this example of a consultancy, Strategy Consulting Inc. They find the same kind of thing there.
Okay, how so? How does this principle work in a service-based business?
Well, in their case, they looked at things like the size of their projects, the types of clients they had, and the specific types of consulting they were doing.
So, like, were bigger projects more profitable? Or were certain client relationships more valuable?
Exactly. And they found, you guessed it, that some areas were way more profitable than others. Like maybe their long-standing clients were much more profitable than new ones, or certain niche consulting services were bringing in the big bucks.
So no matter what kind of business you're in, there are probably these hidden 80-20 relationships just waiting to be discovered.
Absolutely. And the source keeps hammering home this idea of segmentation. It's crucial for uncovering these relationships.
What exactly do they mean by segmentation in this context?
It's basically about grouping things together in different ways to get a clearer picture. Like for Electronic Instruments, Inc., they might segment their sales data by industry or by geographic region or even by the size of their customers.
Oh, I see. So you break things down into smaller groups, and then you can see where the real profit centers are.
Exactly. It allows you to be way more targeted with your strategies and your resources.
But the source also cautions against making decisions solely based on the 80-20 analysis. What's the thinking there?
Right. It's important to remember that the 80-20 principle is a tool. It gives you valuable insights, but it doesn't tell you the whole story.
So just because you see that 20% of your products are generating 80% of your profit, it doesn't necessarily mean you should ditch the other 80%.
Exactly. There might be other strategic reasons for keeping them around, like maybe those less profitable products are bringing in new customers, or maybe they're important for your brand image. You have to look at the bigger picture.
So the 80-20 analysis helps you identify where to focus, but you still need to use your judgment and strategic thinking to make the right decisions.
Right. It's not about blindly following the numbers. It's about using them to inform your overall strategy.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the source also talks about the power of simplicity and introduces something called the 505 principle. How does that relate to the 80-20 idea?
It's definitely related. It basically says that a huge chunk of your problems or costs, maybe 50%, can be traced back to just a tiny number of causes, maybe 5%.
So it's a similar idea to the 80-20 principle, but
Yeah.
even more extreme. A tiny cause leading to a massive effect.
Exactly. And the message here is that simplicity is key. The source literally says, simple is beautiful, complex is ugly, because complexity breeds inefficiencies, errors, and costs.
So by simplifying things, even if it's just in a few key areas, you can potentially make huge improvements.
Right, and they give some great examples of this. Like Corning managed to reduce their costs significantly by simplifying their processes. And there's this case study about a publisher who had all these typesetting errors. They found that just a few types of errors were causing the vast majority of the problems, so they focused on fixing those, and bam, way fewer errors overall.
It's all about finding those leverage points where a small effort can have a big impact.
Exactly. And I think that's a great takeaway from both the 80-20 principle and the 505 principle. Focus on the vital few, simplify where you can, and you often see massive improvements.
All right, so we've talked a lot about business applications, but the source is clear that this stuff isn't just for companies. How can we start applying this way of thinking to our own personal lives?
Yeah, this is where it gets really exciting. The source talks about becoming an 80-20 thinker. It's basically about shifting your mindset and starting to see the world through this lens.
Okay, so what does that look like? What are some of the characteristics of an 80-20 thinker?
Well, they say it's about being reflective, taking the time to understand what's truly important to you. It's also about being unconventional, not just following the crowd or accepting the status quo. They even describe it as being hedonistic in a way.
Hedonistic, like just partying all the time.
No, not quite. It's more about focusing on the experiences and activities that bring you the most joy and value, not just filling your time with busy work, but really savoring the good stuff.
Okay, that makes more sense.
They also say it's about believing in progress, taking a strategic approach to your goals, and realizing that the most effective path isn't always the most obvious one. And interestingly, they say 80-20 thinkers often combine high ambition with a relaxed and confident demeanor.
That's an interesting combination.
Yeah, I think it's because they're focused on what truly matters. They're not sweating the small stuff.
Makes sense. Okay, one area where I think we all struggle is time. How does the 80-20 principle offer a different perspective on managing our time?
Right. Well, the source actually calls the traditional idea of managing your time better an 80-20 time heresy, which is a pretty strong statement.
Okay, so what are they saying instead?
They're saying that it's not about just cramming more tasks into your day. It's about focusing your time on the activities that actually yield the greatest results and satisfaction.
So it's not about being busy, it's about being effective.
Exactly. And they talk about these lists of low value uses of time and highest value uses of time. The key is to be ruthless about cutting back on the low value stuff and dedicating more time to the activities that truly move the needle for you.
So identify what actually matters and focus on that.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to say no to the things that don't.
I love that. What about other areas like relationships or career? How can we apply this thinking there?
Totally applicable. In relationships, they talk about creating a top 20 personal relationships chart.
Okay, that sounds a bit cold.
It's not meant to be cold. It's about identifying the people who truly enrich your life and investing in those relationships. They also talk about achievement alliances, which is basically about building relationships with people who could help you achieve your goals.
So be strategic about your relationships in a positive way.
Exactly. And when it comes to your career, they talk about this thing called the von Manstein matrix. It's a way to categorize your tasks and roles based on their importance and your skills. The idea is to focus on the areas where you excel and that have the biggest impact.
So figure out where your strengths lie and then go all in on those areas.
Right. And they also have these golden rules for career success that are all about this 80-20 mindset, like focusing on your strengths, being selective about your projects, and not being afraid to delegate.
I'm seeing a pattern here.
Right. It's all about focusing on the vital few. And the source even talks about how this applies to earning money. They mention something called superstar earnings. The idea is that a small percentage of people often earn a disproportionate amount of money because they're really good at focusing on high-value activities.
Interesting. So even the world of finance, it's not about working harder, it's about working smarter.
Precisely.
We've covered so much ground here. It seems like this principle is incredibly versatile. It pops up everywhere. The source even touches on societal implications. What are the thoughts there?
Yeah, they briefly discuss how society as a whole could benefit from adopting this kind of thinking. They argue that if we focused our collective efforts on the areas that have the greatest potential for positive impact, we could make much more progress.
So it's about being strategic as a society, not just as individuals.
Exactly.
Amazing. Well, we've covered a lot. Any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
I just say that the 80-20 principle is a really powerful tool. It can help you see the world differently and make smarter decisions in all areas of your life. Don't be afraid to embrace the imbalance, to focus on the vital few, and to cut out the noise.
I love that. So, to our listener, here's a little challenge for you. Take some time to think about your own life. What are the 20% of activities that are bringing you 80% of the results you want? And what are the 80% of activities that are only giving you 20% of the results? Once you see that, you can start shifting your focus and your energy, and I think you'll be amazed at what you can achieve. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure as well.
Until next time.